The Korangal Valley had a way of swallowing sound. On quiet days, you could hear the wind whistling through the trees, a river trickling somewhere below, maybe the distant crackle of a farmer's fire. But that day, silence wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes right before the world explodes. The SEAL team was huddled in the remnants of a mud brick compound, its walls pockmarked from hours of sustained fire. Dust clung to their sweat-soaked uniforms, the fine grit of Afghanistan finding its way into every seam and weapon. LT, Michael Harris crouched behind a chunk of collapsed wall, his M4 pressed to his chest, scanning the ridge just 200 meters. Away, the enemy had the high ground. They also had numbers. And from the sound of it, they were patient. Patience in a firefight is never good news. It meant the Taliban fighters knew exactly where the SEALs were and had the luxury of deciding when to make their move. Every now and then, a single round cracked past Harris's head, not meant to hit him, just meant to remind him they were out there, waiting. "Ammo check," Harris said, keeping his voice low. Petty Officer Second Class Ryan Tex McAllister ducked behind cover, popped his magazine, and grimaced. "3 mags left. That's if I don't start missing." Harris nodded. "Make 'em count. We're not getting resupplied anytime soon." They had been in this position for nearly 6 hours. What started as a simple reconnaissance patrol had spiraled into a running gunfight through the valley's twisting gullies and rocky slopes. They'd been forced down into the compound as the enemy numbers grew. 15 fighters became 20, then 30. And now, Harris guessed 50. Maybe more. The only reason the SEALs weren't already dead was because the insurgents wanted to box them in, bleed them out slowly. The radio crackled, spitting static. Harris leaned in, holding the battered handset close to his ear. "Command, this is Raven 2, requesting immediate air support. We are low on ammo, multiple wounded, surrounded on 3 sides." The reply came back, distant and strained. "Raven 2, all fast movers are currently on task. Closest available CAS is ETA 45. To 60 minutes. Harris closed his eyes for half a second. 60 minutes. In 60 minutes, they'd be overrun. "We're not going to make that," Tex muttered. "Shut it," Harris said, but he didn't disagree. The enemy fire was sporadic, deliberate, probing shots from different angles. They were tightening. The noose. Every few minutes, a burst of fire would kick up dust inches from one of the SEALs' heads, forcing them to duck and relocate. 2 of the team were already hit, minor wounds, but enough to slow them down. Corpsman Doc Ramirez was kneeling over one of the wounded, pressing a bandage into a bleeding shoulder. "We're going to run out of medical supplies before we run out of ammo," he said flatly. Harris glanced skyward. The sky was an impossible shade of blue, cloudless, empty. Normally, by now, he'd hear the distant whine of a jet or the deep thrum of a helicopter. But there was nothing. Not even the comfort of knowing help was on the way. He was calculating options, none good, when the radio hissed again. "Raven 2, be advised. We may have 1 aircraft able to assist. Stand by for confirmation." "1?" Tex asked. "What's that going to do? Scare him with a flyover?" Harris didn't answer. 1 was better than 0. If it was a drone, maybe they could at least get eyes on the enemy positions. But deep down, he knew drones wouldn't come fast enough either. The seconds dragged. More gunfire, more dust. Another round tore into the wall above Harris, showering him with brick. Fragments. He wiped the grit from his eyes and forced himself to breathe evenly. The radio clicked again, and this time the voice on the other end sounded almost surprised. "Raven 2, we've got to divert. Calcine Valkyrie, ETA 4 minutes. Aircraft. Type A-10 Thunderbolt 2. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Tex gave a sharp, humorless laugh. You're kidding. A hog? We're getting a hog? Harris didn't care what aircraft it was, as long as it had teeth. I'll take it. The operator continued. Valkyrie's coming in low on fuel, but she's yours. Make your smoke markers count. Copy, Harris said, pressing the transmit button hard. Raven 2 acknowledges. Tell Valkyrie we're glad she's here. Across the compound, Doc looked up from his patient. Valkyrie? Yeah, Harris said, and he almost smiled. I've heard of her. Another crack of rifle fire forced him back into cover. The enemy must have seen movement. Harris keyed. His mic again. Command, confirm? Is Valkyrie who I think it is? There was a pause. Then, affirmative. She's the one who flew into Sangan last year, when everyone else said it was suicide. Tex swore softly. Well, hell, maybe we got a shot after all. Harris peeked over the wall again. The ridges still bristled with enemy fighters, shifting between boulders, adjusting firing positions. They had no idea death was about to arrive on silver-gray wings. He pulled a yellow smoke grenade from his vest, rolling it between his fingers. You think she'll make a difference? Ramirez asked. Harris met his gaze. If half the stories about Valkyrie are true, she's not just going to make a difference. She's going to change the whole damn fight. Somewhere, far above the valley, an engine's distant growl began to bleed into the silence. 30 miles west of the Corangle, Captain Dana Rourke sat in the cramped cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, easing the stick as she banked toward home. The last sortie had been long and brutal, a convoy escort that ended with 2 destroyed. Technicals and a narrow escape from a surface-to-air missile. She was running low on fuel. Her left arm ached from hours of maneuvering, and she could already picture the blessed silence of the tarmac. Then the radio call came. Valkyrie, this is Control. Stand by for possible divert. Priority 1. Dana's eyes narrowed. Priority 1 meant someone was dying, or about to. She straightened in her seat, scanning the instrument panel as if willing the fuel gauge to give her better news. No such luck. She had maybe 20 minutes before she'd have to be on the ground. Control, Valkyrie copies, she said, voice calm, even. What's the situation? The reply crackled through the headset. SEAL team in the Corangle. Calcine Raven 2. Surrounded, low ammo, multiple wounded. No air assets available within the hour. You're the closest thing we've got. Dana's eyes flicked to the HUD as new coordinates popped up. She knew that valley. Everyone did. It was a meat grinder, a place where even helicopters hesitated to linger and where the terrain turned ambushes into art. She'd heard of units disappearing in there, swallowed by the ridges and the enemy, who knew them like the back of their hand. Control, she said. I'm low on fuel. If I go in, I may not have enough to RTB without tanker support. A pause. Understood, Valkyrie. It's your call. That was the thing about Dana Rourke. She didn't waste time debating what needed to be done. She pushed the throttle forward, feeling the engines rumble through her bones. Control, Valkyrie diverting to assist Raven 2. Vector me in. In the TOC, the Tactical Operations Center on base, a young Marine corporal glanced at the flight board and blinked. He read the call sign again, just to make sure. Valkyrie. He'd heard the stories in the chow hall. The female pilot who flew into Sangan when the weather grounded everyone else who'd stayed over an army unit. For 40 minutes on nothing but fumes to keep the Taliban pinned. The operations chief stepped over, saw the name, and grinned faintly. Oh, those boys are in for a surprise. Back in the cockpit, Dana trimmed the hog for a fast descent. She didn't waste time thinking about the odds. She thought about her weapons loadout. She'd burned through most of her 30mm rounds. on the last mission, but she still had enough to make the GAU-8 sing. 2 AGM-65 Mavericks were strapped under the wings, along with a pair of Hydra rocket pods. Not a full load, but plenty if she was smart. Raven 2, Valkyrie inbound, ETA-3 mics, she transmitted. The reply came immediately, tinged with disbelief. Valkyrie? This is Raven 2. Actual. Please confirm. Confirmed, she said. Mark your friendlies with smoke. Keep it visible. I'll handle the rest. Harris's voice came back, low but certain. Roger that, Valkyrie. We'll make it count. As the valley grew in her forward view, Dana dropped to treetop level, weaving between ridges. The Hog wasn't built for speed. Mach 0.75 was its comfort zone, but it could fly low, slow, and mean. Down here, radar was almost useless against her. The valley floor was a ribbon of dirt and rock, hemmed in by jagged peaks like a throat waiting to be choked. She scanned through her targeting pod, and the scene unfolded in grim detail. Muzzle flashes peppered the SEAL's compound from 3 sides. Fighters in loose formation crept between boulders and scrub brush, their AKs flashing in the afternoon sun. And there, in the middle, a flicker of yellow smoke curling upward. She keyed her mic. Control, Valkyrie has eyes on. Targets. In the open, high ground to the north and west. Engaging. Far below, Harris glanced up at the sudden shadow cutting across the compound. The SEALs squinted, catching the first glimpse of her. Broad, straight wings bristling with ordnance, the distinctive twin tail, and that unmistakable shark mouth painted on the nose. Holy hell, Tex muttered. That's a hog. And? Not just any hog. It was her. Dana's fingers flexed over the stick and trigger. The hog responded like an old warhorse, steady and eager. She armed the GAU-8, felt the deep vibration hum through the airframe as the massive rotary cannon spun up. 30 millimeters of pure hate, each round nearly the size of a Coke bottle, waited to be unleashed. Raven 2, stand by for a run. Keep your heads down. The valley roared to life. Dada-dove, lining up the first ridge. The cannon's growl rolled over the mountains like thunder before the lightning. Except here, the lightning came first. A stream of tungsten rounds stitched across the rock, tearing through fighters and cover alike. The ridge vanished in a haze of dust and smoke. In the compound, Harris felt the shockwave in his chest. The SEALs exchanged quick glances. The kind men share when death has been in the room all day and suddenly decides to leave. Up above, Dana pulled hard into a climb, the Hog's engine straining, her oxygen mask pressing tight against her face. She banked left, hugging the contours of the valley to avoid becoming a predictable target. Her eyes flicked to the smoke. Still good, still marking friendlies. Raven 2, Valkyrie. Round 1's on target. Ready for round 2? Harris's voice came back, steadier than it had been all day. Hit him again. Dana smiled beneath her mask, not out of joy, but out of the cold satisfaction of a professional, doing exactly what she was born to do. The Hog rolled into another dive, and the fight, which had been all but lost minutes ago, was about to change. The A-10 Thunderbolt II wasn't built to be pretty. Its fuselage looked like someone had bolted an airplane around a gun, because in truth, that's exactly what they'd done. Donna had always loved that about the Hog. No wasted elegance, no sleek vanity lines, just armor, weapons, and an engine tone that made ground troops smile and enemies sweat. From her seat, the world narrowed to a targeting reticle, a ripple of heat haze from her engines, and the steady thump of her heart. Her HUD lit with moving shapes, infrared silhouettes dancing across the rugged ridgelines. Enemy fighters were everywhere, their muzzle flashes like fireflies in a storm. Raven 2, Valkyrie. Confirm you still have yellow smoke active. On the ground, Harris ducked as another burst from the ridge chipped away more of their wall. He glanced up. The yellow smoke was still curling, faint but visible. Affirmative, Valkyrie. Yellow smoke marks our position. Cleared hot on anything else. Copy that, Dana replied. Her voice was calm, almost casual, the voice of someone who'd done this enough times to be immune to panic. She leveled the hog's nose toward the western ridge. In her mind, she visualized the geometry, the angle of descent, wind direction, the likely trajectory of return fire. She adjusted slightly, knowing the first run mattered most. It had to rattle them, take their confidence, make them think the sky itself was against them. Throttle forward, crosshairs aligned, her finger squeezed. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon erupted. It wasn't a bang, or even a rat-tat-tat like smaller guns. It was a deep, mechanical growl, like a chainsaw chewing through steel. Each round left the barrel at nearly a mile per second, punching through rock, dirt, and anything unfortunate enough to be in between. Through her targeting pod, she watched the ridge blossom into chaos. Fighters who'd been leaning into there. AKs were suddenly running for cover, or being flung off their perches entirely. The rock itself seemed to shudder under the impact. Down in the compound, Tex let out an involuntary laugh. God bless the warthog. Dust filled the valley like smoke from a burning city. Dana pulled up sharply, the hog's wings groaning against the gee forces. She cut left, using the mountain spine as cover while her brain processed the results of the first pass. Good hits. At least 8 down on that ridge, heavy machine gun position gone. The SEALs would have some breathing room on their western flank. But the northern slope was still alive. She could see the flashes from mortar tubes and the telltale arcs of RPGs as they lobbed explosives toward the compound. One rocket hit short, kicking up a plume of dirt that peppered the SEALs' cover. Another slammed into the far wall, showering them with debris. Raven 2, Valkyrie. Mark northern targets. A puff of orange smoke erupted from the compound. Harris kept his head low, but couldn't help glancing up. Against the sheer walls of the valley, Dana's hog looked impossibly close, like a predator circling prey. Valkyrie, orange smoke marks active mortar pit and RPG positions. Danger. Close, Dana's lips tightened. Danger close meant the margin for error was razor thin. Too wide, and she'd risk hitting the SEALs themselves. Too short, and she'd be ineffective. But this was where the hog shined. Its stability at low speed let her carve precision in two. Chaos. She banked in, rolled the hog onto its side, and let gravity pull her nose toward the smoke. The ridgeline loomed large in her canopy, dotted with the dark figures of enemy fighters racing themselves behind rocks. Guns, 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 she called. The hog's growl shook the air again. A straight, smoking line of 30 millimeters depth connected her to the ridge. The mortar pit vanished in a geyser of dirt and steel. 2 RPG gunners dove for cover, but didn't make it. Their launchers spun away in pieces. Impact good, Dana reported, pulling up through the valley's narrow throat. She caught a glimpse of the SEALs below, a handful of figures moving between positions, taking advantage of the chaos she'd just created. For the first time in hours, Harris felt the balance shift. Keep it up, Valkyrie. We're pushing forward, but Dana knew it wasn't over. In her HUD, new heat signatures bloomed at the eastern entrance of the valley. Reinforcements. She counted quickly. At least a dozen fighters, maybe more, moving fast. Some were on foot, others riding in the back of a battered pickup with a mounted DSHK heavy machine gun. She switched to rockets. Raven 2, be advised. Eastern element moving in, reinforced, technical with heavy gun. Harris swore. We can't hold against that. Do your thing, Valkyrie? Dana angled in, feeling the hog's frame buffet as she dipped lower. At this altitude, she could see the expressions on the fighters' faces: surprise, fear, the dawning realization that they just walked into the kill zone. She thumbed the release, sending a ripple of Hydra rockets streaking toward the road. The technical took the first hit. The explosion lifted it sideways, flipping it onto its roof in a spray of fire and shrapnel. The fighters scattered, diving into the brush. Dana strafed the fleeing shapes, each pass precise, controlled. In the compound, the SEALs moved like wolves finally smelling blood. Tex and Ramirez shifted positions, firing on retreating fighters. Harris directed them forward, reclaiming chunks of ground they'd lost earlier in the day. Valkyrie, Harris called. That's doing it. They're breaking. Dana's eyes scanned the valley one more time. Smoke marked her handiwork. The western ridge silent, the northern slope a mess of shattered rock. The eastern road blocked by the burning hulk of the technical. But the fight wasn't done. She could feel it in her gut. There was still one last push coming. Her fuel warning light blinked yellow. She ignored it. Raven 2, Valkyrie. I'm not leaving until this valley's yours. The A-10's twin turbofan engines roared low over the mountains, their guttural growl echoing through the Afghan valley like a predator closing in on prey. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kane's gloved hands gripped the control stick, her eyes locked on the heads-up display. The weather was worsening. Dark clouds rolled in from the north, visibility dropping to less than a mile. But the SEAL team didn't have time for the storm to pass. Below, in a narrow riverbed, the SEALs were pinned down, their position illuminated only by the dull flicker of muzzle flashes. The enemy had dug in deep along both ridgelines, interlocking fields of fire that made movement impossible. Sarah could hear the clipped voices of the JTAC on the ground, steady, calm, but with an edge of urgency that told her they were running out of options. Warthog 2-1. You are cleared hot, danger close, the JTAC said, his tone making clear what danger close meant: any mistake, and she'd be dropping 30mm rounds within mere yards of friendly forces. Sarah exhaled slowly. Copy. Cleared hot. Her right hand moved to arm the GAU-8 Avenger, the monstrous 7-barrel rotary cannon mounted under the nose. It was a weapon famous for tearing through armor, bunkers, and anything else foolish enough to stand in its way. The kind of weapon the Taliban feared even more than Apache gunships. She banked hard, the gi forces pressing her into the seat. Through breaks in the cloud cover, she caught glimpses of muzzle flashes, tiny pinpricks of light in the darkness, and the faint movement of enemy fighters scrambling into new positions. She didn't have perfect visuals, but she didn't need them. She had coordinates, she had instinct, and she had the Warthog's brutal precision. 30 seconds. To run, she said into the mic. On the ground, the SEAL team leader shouted for his men to keep low and brace for the hit. They knew what was coming. They'd seen it 10 strikes before. The sound alone was enough to shake the soul. Sarah lined up her shot, crosshairs locked, over the eastern ridge. Then she squeezed the trigger. The Warthog's cannon erupted, the iconic birdie tearing through the night. Tracers streaked downward like fiery comets, ripping into the ridge with unrelenting fury. Dirt, rock, and enemy fighters alike vanished in an instant under the sheer force of the barrage. The JTAC's voice came through, tinged with adrenaline. Good effect on target. Warthog 2-1. You just cleared half the ridge. Sarah didn't answer right away. She was already banking for another pass. She knew that in a fight like this, one run wasn't enough. The enemy would regroup, rearm, and push forward unless she kept the pressure on. The storm intensified, wind buffeting the aircraft as rain began to sheet across the canopy. The mountains, made flying here dangerous on a good day. In this weather, it was borderline insane. But Sarah had no intention of pulling out. Her second pass targeted the western ridge. She spotted a cluster of fighters moving toward a machine gun nest and brought the crosshairs to bear. Another squeeze of the trigger, another earth-shattering burst from the A-10. The gun's recoil shuddered through the frame, but the rounds hit with surgical precision, tearing apart the position before the gunner could fire. On the ground, the SEALs seized the moment. "Move! Move!" their leader shouted, leading the team toward the narrow gap in enemy fire. They scrambled over rocks, waded through the shallow river, and dove for cover in a small ravine. Sarah kept circling above, her eyes scanning for movement. The storm now was a full-on squall, visibility dipping even further. Lightning flashed against the jagged peaks, and for a moment, the entire valley lit up, revealing shapes moving along the high ground. "JTAC, I've got more hostiles north ridge, moving to flank your position," she called out. The JTAC's reply was instant. "Hit M, all you." Sarah adjusted her approach, the wind pushing hard against her left wing. She had to fight the aircraft just to stay on course. This time she opted for rockets. The M151 hydropods roared to life, streaks of fire cutting through the rain before slamming into the ridge. Explosions ripped the high ground apart, sending enemy fighters scattering. Then came the call Sarah didn't want to hear. "Warthog 2-1, Winchester on ammo?" She checked her stores. She still had a fraction of her 30mm rounds left, but the rockets were nearly gone. She could finish this, but she had to be smart about it. Her HUD flickered for a moment, a symptom of the rain and static building. In the storm, the mountainous terrain below was now just shadows, and the faint pulse of infrared strobes marking the SEALs' positions. If she made one mistake, friendly fire was a real risk. "Final pass," she said. She banked one last time, coming in so low she could see the enemy scrambling along the ridge, some firing wildly into the storm, others already retreating. The GEO-8 roared again, longer this time, the barrels spinning until the last of the ammo tore into the hillside. When the cannon fell silent, the valley was too. No more muzzle flashes, no more movement. The JTAC came through, voice steady now. "Warthog 2-1, you just saved a SEAL team. Drinks are on us if we make it out." Sarah allowed herself a quick smile, but the mission wasn't over yet. She had to guide them to extraction, and the storm was getting worse. For now, though, the fight was theirs. The A-10's engines growled as Captain Jenna Colbank descended into the narrow Afghan valley. Below, the firefight was devolving into chaos. The SEALs were scattered among broken walls and rock outcroppings, pinned by machine gun bursts from dug-in insurgent positions. Dust and smoke hung in the air like a veil, and through her visor, Jenna could see tracer fire stitching the ground dangerously close to her comrades. In the cockpit, Jenna's voice was steady, almost calm, as she toggled her comms. "Viper 1 in position. Mark your hot zones." "Viper, we're boxed in on 3 sides," came the strained reply from SEAL Commander Harlan Riggs. "North Ridge heaviest fire. But watch your run. It's tight." Jenna smiled faintly. Tight runs were her specialty. Her hands moved with surgical precision over the controls. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately called the Warthog, was not built for speed or beauty, but for this exact kind of mission: low, slow, and lethal. She pushed the stick forward, dropping into a low-altitude pass that put her right between 2 jagged cliff faces. It was dangerous. One wrong twitch, and the mountain would swallow her whole, but she needed to get close to guarantee accuracy. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon under her nose was already armed, a 30mm beast capable of shredding armored vehicles. But in this fight, her targets weren't tanks. They were hardened firing positions dug into rock, places where insurgents had the high ground and the numbers. "Brace your ears," she warned over the combs. "Hog is about to sing." She squeezed the trigger. Brort! The sound ripped through the valley like a thunderclap. A stream of depleted uranium rounds tore into the north ridge, erupting the mountainside into clouds of debris and flame. Enemy tracers abruptly ceased from that direction, buried beneath rock and steel. From the SEAL's position, the effect was electric. "Holy hell," muttered one operator, watching an entire machine gun nest disappear in an instant. But Jenna wasn't done. Pulling up hard, she banked left and swung around for another pass. The insurgents, realizing the shift in momentum, tried to scatter. But the A-10's slow, stalking pattern kept her in visual range of every runner. Her second burst walked a line of fire across a cluster of fighters attempting to move on the SEAL's flank. They crumpled like ragdolls, the terrain around them ripped into craters. Commander Briggs' voice returned, urgent, but with a note of relief. "You're buying us breathing room. Keep hammering." Jenna adjusted for wind and angle, ignoring the heat warnings blinking on her panel. The narrow valley made her a bigger target for small arms fire. She could see bullets sparking against her fuselage, but the Warthog was famously tough. Its titanium bathtub armor cocooned her cockpit, and she trusted it like she trusted her own skin. Another pass. Another bird. The sound seemed to rattle the bones of every man on the ground, friend and foe alike. SEALs began to regroup, moving toward better cover as the enemy suppression faltered. Still, there was one stubborn stronghold. Bunker built into the valley's southern ridge. Intelligence had flagged it before, but ground units hadn't been able to touch it. Now, its heavy-caliber gun was pivoting toward the SEALs again. Jenna knew that if it opened up, they'd be back to square one. She rolled into a near-vertical dive, her altimeter numbers spinning downward in a blur. The bunker filled her HUD, a rectangle of shadow in the rock. She released a pair of a GM-65 Maverick missiles in quick succession. The launch jolted her aircraft slightly, and two streaks of white smoke dove toward the target. Impact. The entire face of the ridge exploded outward in a sheet of fire and pulverized stone. Echoes slammed back and forth between the cliffs, and for a moment there was nothing but the hiss of debris falling. The bunker was gone, reduced to a smoldering hole. The SEALs took that moment to push forward. Harlan's voice barked commands over the radio, and operators leapt from cover, using the chaos Jenna had created to clear the remaining pockets of resistance. Her Warthog wheeled overhead like a steel guardian, picking off any fighters who tried to regroup. But even as she worked, Jenna's eyes scanned the terrain with a pilot's sixth sense. Something was off. Too many enemy positions had been well prepared, too many fallback points plotted in advance. This wasn't just a random Taliban cell, it was a coordinated defense, maybe even a trap for U.S. forces. Viper? Status? Harlan asked between bursts of gunfire. "Still with you," Jenna replied. "But you've got something bigger here than a valley skirmish. Feels like they were expecting us." There was no time to dig into it. The fight still raged in pockets, and the SEALs needed her until the last insurgent was down. She lined up another strafing run, her cannon chewing through a rock wall, hiding a sniper's nest. A final scream of BRRT sent the surviving fighters fleeing down the far slope. The battle wasn't over. Jenna knew that from the stubborn churn of adrenaline in her blood, but the valley was shifting. The SEALs were moving from defense to offense, and every time she pulled the trigger, she wasn't just killing the enemy. She was carving open a path for her brothers on the ground. Above it all, the Warthog's roar had become the sound of salvation. A valley was silent, now too silent. The dust had settled from the last pass, and the smell of cordite still clung to the air like a stubborn shadow. The seals crouched behind what little cover remained, exchanging quick, tense glances. They were battered, bloodied, and dangerously low on ammo. Lieutenant Connor's voice cracked over the radio, desperation hiding beneath his sharp tone. "Angel 1, we've got no movement on our position, but they'll regroup. They always do." Up in the sky, Captain Ava Martinez gripped the A-10's stick, her eyes scanning the terrain below. She knew what he meant. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were waiting, slithering into better positions, pulling the seals deeper into a trap. Her targeting screen showed faint heat signatures clustering near a ridge at the far end of the valley. They weren't random. They were coordinated. She'd flown dozens of missions over dangerous terrain, but something about this fight was personal now. These weren't just call signs and coordinates. These were men on the ground, her countrymen hanging on by a thread. And she wasn't about to let that thread snap. Angel 1 to ground, eyes on enemy, regrouping at your 6. "I'm taking the ridge." The reply came instantly. "Copy, Angel 1. Make it loud." Ava rolled the Warthog onto its side, feeling the familiar tug of G-forces as the A-10 banked hard toward the ridge. Her hands were steady, but her pulse drummed with the Predator's focus. The twin GAU-8 Avenger cannons were primed, their barrels hungry. The ridge was thick with rock formations, natural cover that made it nearly impossible for infantry to push through without casualties. But the A-10 wasn't infantry. At 2,500 feet, she spotted them enemy fighters darting between boulders, loading RPGs, setting up what looked like a tripod-mounted heavy machine gun. She smiled grimly. "Not on my watch." She lined up her shot. The reticle locked. Then, with a low growl that built into a thunderous roar, the A-10's cannon opened fire. The sound was a ripping, metallic snarl that echoed off the valley walls. BRRRT, kind of sound that every soldier on the ground recognized instantly. It wasn't just noise. It was salvation. Shells the size of beer bottles tore through the ridge. The rocks exploded into clouds of dust and shrapnel. Enemy positions disintegrated in bursts of fire and smoke. Ava didn't stop. She rolled into a second pass, this time unloading the Hydra rockets. The explosions bloomed like fiery flowers along the ridge, each one snapping another enemy plan in half. On the ground, the SEALs felt the tremors through the dirt. The air itself seemed to pulse with each impact. Chief Hawkins looked up and shook his head in disbelief. "That's not an airstrike. That's a damn storm." But the fight wasn't done. As Ava pulled up from her second run, she caught movement fast, low coming from the east slope. An enemy technical truck mounted with a DSHK heavy gun was barreling toward the SEAL's position. If it got close enough, it could shred their cover in seconds. "Ground, you've got incoming technical. Bearing east marking now." She didn't wait for acknowledgement. Her finger hovered over the Maverick missile trigger. The lock tone rang in her headset, and she squeezed. The missile leapt from the wing, streaking down in a clean white arc before slamming into the truck in a fireball that lit up the dusk sky. The SEALs watched the wreckage tumble down the slope, flames licking at the twisted metal. Cheers erupted over the comms, not from relief alone, but from something deeper. She wasn't just holding the line for them. She was turning the tide. "Angel 1, this is Connor. You've got the valley's attention. And I think they hate you more than us now." Ava chuckled into the mic. "Good. Hate's a distraction. Keep moving." Her eyes swept the landscape again, tracing smoke trails and impact craters. Every pass she made didn't just thin the enemy ranks. It gave the SEALs room to breathe, to regroup, to plan their next move. But she knew the clock was still ticking. The enemy was adaptable, and sooner or later, they'd try something desperate. Over the next 15 minutes, she became the constant predator in the sky. The A-10 dipped, strafed, and climbed, her cannons stitching lines of destruction across enemy formations. She flew so low at times that Chief Hawkins swore he could see the paint on her fuselage, and the ridge went still. The heat signatures on her display began to scatter, retreating toward the far edge of the valley. She could almost hear the frustration in their movements. Whoever was commanding them had just realized their plan was falling apart. On the ground, the SEALs began moving again, reclaiming ground they'd been forced to abandon. Every few minutes, Ava's voice would cut in with precise updates: enemy positions, safe lanes, possible traps. She was no longer just their air support. She was part of their squad, stitched into their survival. As the sun dipped lower, painting the valley in red-gold light, Ava made one last pass over the ridge. The enemy was gone, at least for now. Smoke curled from shattered rocks, and the ground was littered with the twisted remains of weapons and gear. She pulled up, circling above, scanning for any sign of a counterattack. Angel 1, this is Connor. Ridge is clear. You just bought. You as our way out. Ava's reply was steady, but there was a warmth in it now. Copy that, Lieutenant. Just doing my job. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just a job. Something had shifted in this fight. The SEALs weren't just surviving anymore. They were advancing. And it wasn't because they were the best on the ground. It was because they had a guardian in the sky who refused to let the valley swallow them. She throttled back, keeping the A-10 circling above like a hawk. The mission wasn't over, but for the first time since the first shot was fired, she knew they had a chance. And in war, sometimes a chance is all you need. The valley was no longer just a battlefield. It was a gauntlet, a crucible of fire, metal, and determination. Captain Mara Lawson had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. Every second in the A-10's cockpit now felt stretched to infinity, each decision a razor-thin balance between boldness and suicide. The Taliban fighters weren't retreating anymore, they were closing in. The SEALs were in a kill box, and Mara knew it. Her HUD flickered with red warnings. Fuel low, ammo count dwindling, hydraulic pressure in the left aileron dangerously unstable. The A-10 wasn't designed for finesse. It was built to take hits and keep going, but even the Warthog had limits. She could hear the groan of the airframe in every sharp turn, like the aircraft itself was pleading for mercy. On the ground, Master Chief Rourke's team was pinned behind a collapsed stone wall, the only cover between them and a high ridge crawling with enemy marksmen. Every time they tried to reposition, a sniper round cracked the air, forcing them back into the dirt. Overcomes, Mara's voice cut through the chaos. Rourke, mark the ridge. I'll clear it. He didn't hesitate. Copy. Pop smoke. A thin column of purple smoke spiraled upward, instantly drawing enemy fire. Mara throttled forward, dropped altitude, and dove toward the smoke. The Gi forces pressed into her chest, her vision tunneling, but she kept her eyes locked on the ridge. The ground rushed up, the A-10's engines howling like a beast enraged. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 cannon erupted in a chain of ear-splitting BRRRTs, the rounds, chewing into rock, dirt, and anyone foolish enough to remain exposed. Entire boulders shattered into clouds of dust, and within seconds, the ridge fell silent. Mara pulled up hard, narrowly avoiding a shoulder-fired rocket that streaked past her tail. She wasn't safe yet. The enemy had adjusted. From the far side of the valley, two Technicals pickup trucks with mounted heavy machine guns raced toward the SEAL's position, spraying rounds indiscriminately. Mara's ammo counter flashed 200 rounds remaining. That was barely enough for a single precise pass. Rourke, You've got armor inbound. 30 seconds out. We can't move, Rourke barked. It's on you, Lawson. She took a breath. Then let's make it count. Dropping to treetop level, Mara threaded the A-10 between ridges, using the terrain to mask her approach. The wind roared past, rattling her helmet. She flicked the master arm switch, lined up the first truck, and squeezed. The cannon roared. Again, tearing the lead vehicle into a twisted mess of metal and flames. Without breaking stride, she swung the nose toward the second truck, another short burst, another explosion. But in war, victory was never clean. As she banked away, an RPG slammed into the A-10's right wing. The cockpit shook violently, alarms screaming in her ears. She fought the controls, the stick trembling in her hands, the aircraft rolling toward. An uncontrolled dive. Mara, you hit? Rourke's voice was sharp, urgent. I'm still here, she gritted out. But she's not happy. Smoke trailed from the wing, and the right aileron was sluggish. She knew the Warthog could fly with one wing half gone, but she also knew it wouldn't last forever under this kind of punishment. Her fuel warning blinked again, less than 10 minutes of flight time remaining. Still, the fight wasn't over. She spotted enemy reinforcements pushing through the valley floor, using the chaos to advance. They were less than 100 meters. From Rourke's position, she had one bomb left to Mk-82 general purpose. Not a precision weapon, but in the right hands, it could turn the tide. She climbed just enough to line up the shot, then dove once more. Her eyes narrowed, the crosshair. Steady, bomb away. The valley floor erupted in a thunderous wave of dirt and fire, scattering the advancing fighters. The shockwave rolled over the SEALs' position, rattling their teeth but saving their lives. The radio crackled again. That did it, Lawson, Rourke said, breathing hard. But if you've got anything left, now's the time. We're moving to Hicksville. Mara glanced at her gauges. Barely 150 rounds. One pass, maybe two. The A-10 wasn't a speed demon. It couldn't sprint to safety like an F-16. If she stayed, she'd have to fight her way out. She made her choice. Banking hard, she swept low across the valley, strafing any pockets of movement that threatened. The SEALs. She wasn't just giving them cover, she was daring the enemy to shoot at her instead. Her final rounds clattered out, and the GAU-8 fell silent. The sky felt unnaturally quiet. Mara, we're clear, Rourke's voice finally came through. You've done enough. Time to bring that bird home. She exhaled, her pulse still pounding. The A-10 shuddered as she climbed out of the valley, smoke still trailing from her wing. Her body ached from the strain, her knuckles white on the stick. Below, the SEALs melted into the terrain, heading toward their extraction point. The gauntlet had been run, and they'd all made it out alive. But as Mara turned toward base, she knew this wasn't the end. The A-10 was limping. The fight had pushed her to the edge, and somewhere in that valley, there were still eyes watching her go. And those eyes weren't done yet. The explosions rolled down the valley like a drumbeat from another world. One after another, the A-10's GAU-8 rounds punched through enemy positions with unrelenting precision. Each burst sent dirt, rock, and hostile fighters flying. The ground shook beneath the boots of the SEALs, but this time it wasn't fear or exhaustion making their knees tremble. It was the sheer, undeniable force of their salvation, tearing through the chaos above. Captain Torres crouched behind a half-collapsed mud wall, his chest heaving, watching the spectacle with wide eyes. She's not stopping, he muttered, almost in disbelief. Beside him, Petty Officer First Class Miles gave a half-laugh, half-groan. Would you? He shot back. After coming all this way? After seeing what we were up against? No chance. Above, Major Emily Hart was locked in. Her voice was calm, almost cold, as she read off coordinates and confirmed strike zones with the JTAC. Rifle, 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 she called out, her tone steady even as the gun's roar drowned out everything else. She wasn't just flying. She was orchestrating the destruction of an entire enemy force, ensuring no stray shot hit the SEALs pinned down below. She knew she had seconds, maybe minutes, before fuel or ammo forced her hand, but every one of those seconds was going to count. The enemy, once bold and relentless, was now scattered. Hart strikes had shredded their heavy weapons positions and destroyed the vehicles they'd hoped to use for an escape. From the SEALs' vantage points, they could see fighters abandoning their cover and sprinting up the ridge lines in panic. A few tried to rally. Hart saw that, too. A burst of tracer rounds stitched across their path, cutting the attempted counterattack before it could form. Eagle 1, you've got them moving toward the north tree line, the JTAC relayed. Copy, I see them. Cleared hot? Hart asked, even though they both knew the answer. Cleared hot, came the reply. The A-10 dipped the wing and banked hard, giving her line of sight over the retreating fighters. The cannon spun up again, a mechanical growl that was almost alive. A moment later, it spat fire. The tree line erupted, splintered wood and black. Smoke rising in the evening light. On the ground, the SEALs moved. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a cleanup. With the enemy broken, they were able to push forward, clearing pockets of resistance that had been too dangerous to approach before. Hart circled overhead, scanning for threats. Whenever one appeared, she was there, quick and precise, carving it out of existence before it could even touch the men she was protecting. But as the valley began to fall quiet, the weight of what had just happened started to hit them. The SEALs had been out of fight, ammo nearly gone, bodies worn down, options exhausted. And then the sky had opened up and an A-10 flown by. A woman none of them had met before had turned certain defeat into survival. Eagle 1, this is Havoc Team, Torres said into the com, his voice finally steady. You just saved every man down here. I don't think thank you covers it. Hart's voice came back after a pause, softer now. Copy, Havoc Team. Just doing my job. Glad I could make a difference. Miles shook his head. Just doing her job? Yeah, okay. They watched her bank again, the A-10's silhouette, cutting across the setting sun. The GAU-8 was quiet now, the last of its ammo spent. Her fuel was low. They knew she'd have to break off soon. But for a few moments longer, she stayed with them, circling above like a guardian who wasn't quite ready to leave. Then the JTAC called it. Eagle 1, you're clear to RTB. We'll take it from here. Understood? Hart replied. Stay safe down there. The SEALs stood in the ruined valley, watching as the A-10 angled away, its twin engines leaving a fading trail in the sky. None of them spoke for a moment. They didn't need to. Every man there knew they'd remember this day for the rest of their lives, and the woman who had owned the skies when they needed her most. Somewhere, miles away and descending toward base, Hart allowed herself a breath. She'd flown countless missions, hit hundreds of targets, but this one felt different. Maybe it was the sheer desperation in those voices when she'd first checked in. Maybe it was the way they'd fought, refusing to break even when the odds were impossible. Or maybe it was just knowing that tonight, 32 men were still alive because she'd been in the right place at the right time with the right machine. Down in the valley, Torres finally broke the silence. When we get home, he said, first round's on me. And if she's anywhere near the bar, she drinks free for life. Second round's on me, Miles added without hesitation. Third's mine, someone else called. The laughter that followed was quiet, but it was real, the kind that comes only after the storm has passed. The night settled over the valley, stars beginning to pierce the fading twilight. The seals moved to secure their position, but there, thoughts kept drifting upward, to the sound of that cannon and the steady voice behind it. They didn't know if they'd ever see her again, but they knew one thing for certain. She'd been the difference between a battlefield grave and a walk out of this place. And for that, she'd always be one of them, even if she'd never worn their trident.